Welcome everybody to Salesforce's Industry Series events, where we get to hear both perspectives from our customers and how they underwent their digital transformation, and also from the point of view of the implementation partner. Before we kick off today's session, we would like to acknowledge our country. Salesforce acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Another note before we start today's session that Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Partners and customers should make buying decisions only on the products commercially available.
Welcome everyone, my name's Jarrod. I'm the Sales Director at Cloudwerx, Salesforce Implementation Partner. And joining me today is Sally Mack from SafetyCulture. Welcome Sally.
Hello.
I would like you to tell us a little bit about SafetyCulture, what the business does, where it's come from perhaps, and then a little bit about your role.
For sure. So SafetyCulture is a workplace operations platform is what we call it. And essentially what we have is a collection of products that help businesses understand what's working, what's not, what they can do to improve their operations, that sort of continuous improvement, operational efficiency. It's a collection of these three products, first being iAuditor, which is sort of our flagship, I guess you would call it. It is an inspection tool first and foremost. So it's essentially, capturing that frontline inspection and issue data, allowing workers to sort of raise what's happening in their day-to-day, perform regular checks and just help get that understanding of the pulse of the business. We then have EdApp, which is a micro-learning platform. So that's helping, take some of the things that are being identified through iAuditor, through these inspections, and then helping businesses improve based on those trends that are coming through there. So training their staff, training different contractors that are coming in, using that for that continuous improvement. And then last suite in the product just recently is a product called Shexy, which is a lone worker solution. So helping keep those workers that may be going out on their own to sort of higher risk environments or on their own, just keeping them safe while they're there, keeping track of them and keeping them safe should anything go wrong.
Fantastic. And an Australian business? An
Australian business founded in Townsville. Founded originally, I'm going to get the year wrong, but early 2000s. iAuditor was started in 2012. Prior to that, we were a safety docs business. So we still have safety docs, and it was essentially creating templates of regular checklists that businesses needed to perform to keep their employees safe and compliant.
And a bit of a success story, Australian success story, quite successful, the business?
Yeah. We think so.
And so your role,
my role,
has moved over the years, but what did you start as and what's your role today?
So I first joined SafetyCulture in 2018 as their Chief of Staff. So I sort of held that role, which was a bit of a weird and wonderful catch-all position at the time, for about 18 months, and then moved across into revenue operations. So I now lead our global revenue operations team. There's a team of about 12 of us across the world, doing all things sort of people, processes, systems, data, enablement, all the bits and bobs that sort of help support our marketing, sales and customer success teams.
So global now, started in Townsville, now global operations. Your title is now Head of
Revenue Operations.
So revenue operations, we hear that word a bit now in the tech world, and
we do.
Maybe some people are a bit confused about what that might mean. Can you give me your definition of revenue operations, or RevOps for short?
RevOps, as it's called. So RevOps is essentially just the consolidation of all of the operations functions that typically support your customer-facing teams. So particularly in SaaS, where that sort of relationship with your customer doesn't end with that first sale. You've got that continued ownership, you've got that ongoing, you want to be retaining that customer and helping them grow. You want to make sure that the operations that support those teams that do that are connected. So it often came about due to sort of breakdown across systems and processes and data that were supporting those customer facing teams. There just being gaps and sort of inefficiencies coming out by having different teams own different parts of the puzzle. So RevOps sort of came to be created through a desire to bring that all together to support the one customer that's a one customer throughout the whole journey, but help get better flow of data, more accurate data, systems that are supporting each other and aren't kind of operating in silos, to help grow that revenue engine, really.
And there can be a bit of a thought out there that potentially RevOps is at the quoting process into the balance sheet and finance, but your opinion of that is it's actually well before the quoting process, right?
So in an ideal world, RevOps covers your full way from like brand awareness, very, very top of funnel, through to that retention piece from a customer side. So you've got that full customer life cycle in there. And yes, absolutely, part of that is quoting and billing and all the finance side of things, but it's that full customer journey that we want to be looking at, not just the sort of sales to finance piece.
So with that definition, what types of businesses need to consider RevOps or revenue operations as a thing, as something to improve?
Any business that, in my opinion, any business that has a marketing, sales and customer success
so
team,
everyone.
A combination of any of those. The biggest thing is, how do you bring those teams on the one page? So how do you not have this disconnect between your functions because they're singing from different hymn sheets, they're looking at different data, they're making decisions in silos. So wherever you've got teams like that you want to be working together, that's where RevOps stands to play.
So take us back a few years, before Cloudwerx and SafetyCulture started to work together. You were getting into the RevOps space personally. You came from Chief of Staff, so I've got this West Wing thing going on here, but from Chief of Staff into the revenue operations. What was it like back then in the early days at SafetyCulture when there was just a few handfuls of you and you were out there quoting and selling and growing at scale? What was it like?
I think they would call it the Wild Wild West. No, we were, look, it's your classic startup story, right? When I joined SafetyCulture, I think we had about maybe 30 sales and success people globally. So we had just set up offices in the US and the UK. And with that came a lot of just testing to see what works, right? We were figuring out pricing, we were figuring out the right contract terms. We didn't know how customers wanted to buy from us at the time. There was a lot of that testing and learning. So it's fantastic. It's exactly what you should be doing. But when it comes to how you scale that, there's a ton of bespoke stuff happening in there, which means that there's a ton of manual processes that, our poor finance team is having to manage through huge spreadsheets that break and there's errors and all the rest of it. So I think it was one of those times where we were trying to build systems and process that weren't system and processes for that sake, but were things that were actually going to enable us to unlock that next level of scale in an efficient way.
Yeah, so it was a bit of forming and storming. So we say
Completely.
Wild Wild West, but not in too negative a sense.
No,
because you
not
have
at all.
to try and kind of build the plane in the air a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But it got to a point where, you guys had to make some sort of changes. What were just some of the challenges between, we talk about marketing, sales, finance, ops. We didn't really have ops at that point. But what were some of the individual challenges between those teams that led you to a bit of a pause and a retake of the situation?
I think one of the biggest ones was actually in that relationship between sales and finance. So what we found was, by nature of sales going out and closing those deals and doing what they could to get a deal across the line, it often created a lot of pain in the back end for finance. And there was just this real disconnect between what we were selling and what we were actually able to support from a systems perspective, how our subscription thing actually worked, and there being a disconnect between what we'd sold the customer and then what we were actually able to bill. So that just created all this friction in terms of sales and finance maybe not being the best of friends at the time, and each seeing the other as either a handcuff or a burden or something that was just making each other's lives much harder.
So sales is out there growing the company, bringing in new contracts, probably with some big vendors, I'd imagine, back then. So some big contracts and wanting a high five, and finance is sitting there going, how am I going to service this
pretty much
crazy deal that you've just sold and now it's on my plate?
And we were getting to a point where to grow the sales team as we wanted to, we would have needed to grow the finance team just as big and just as quickly. And that's not an effective way to scale a business. I think we also have the complexity of being a product-led growth business as well, right? And wanting there to be that interaction between customers just able to come and find us and sign up to the product, see value in it, continue to use it and grow organically in that way, while also having this balance of a sales-assisted growth model as well, where you've kind of got both that top-down and bottoms-up and wanting to make sure that they're working together. That can be difficult to make those things sing harmoniously.
So about 2.5 years ago, we're in this phase, and so you are in a role where you've got some sort of responsibility to make some changes, and we talk about, you know, forming, storming, and now we're trying to get into norming and performing a little bit. Talk to us a bit about Salesforce Cpq.
Sure.
What does it stand for? Configure, price, quote. But this tool was new to you because you're not a technical or technology person by trade, right?
I'm an accountant by trade.
So numbers are important.
Numbers are important.
And so one of the solutions you looked at obviously was Salesforce Cpq, which is now Revenue Cloud. Tell us a bit about what that process looked like. So evaluating, having a look at different options out there. What was it that drew you to that as a solution?
For sure. So actually just before we kind of started this process, we actually went through a price change. So we, in early 2019, we changed our price and we managed that whole thing through spreadsheets, which was challenging for 15,000 customers or something globally at the time. Managing a price change through a spreadsheet was a mess. But with that, it also pointed to this real manual process that we had, but also kind of absence of oversight of what was happening, so that we were able to more accurately forecast or make sure we had controls in place, make sure we were comfortable with what we were selling from, like with the deals that we were doing from a commercial standpoint. Did they make sense? So we had a bit of a change in leadership at the time. We had some new, we had a new CFO come in, a new COO, and they had both come from businesses that had much stronger governance or guardrails, whatever the right word is there. They would just, I guess, they saw the pain and had also seen what good looked like, I think, at previous businesses. So they sort of came in and we went through a process of actually trying to solve for this disconnect between our sales and finance team by starting to look at what a standard deal looked like and how we could almost negotiate between those two parties on coming together to sort of solve for 80% of these deals, knowing that we still wanted to have the ability to be a little bit bespoke, to be a little bit flexible, but do so in a way that allowed both sales and finance to have a say in what would work for both of them. So that sort of led us to understanding that, you know, there were gaps in things like approval processes, and they were, you know, happening via Slack or email or not. Or, you know, we had our sales reps still creating all of their order forms manually through a Word document, which meant that, you know, it was taking the team probably 10 minutes to create any quote, and then you always have a fat finger moment, so there's always something in there that's just a little bit off, so then you've got to do it all over again.
Not enough zeros or too many zeros.
Or just an incorrectly spelt something, wrong dates, everything. We kind of had this classic startup situation. I'm sure we're not the first to have had this, where, you know, it was just a little bit of a mess. So in having these leaders come on board and kind of really getting to that boiling point around the just complexities and challenges and, you know, breakdown in those relationships, we went on that journey to look at how we brought people together on the same page as to what we did and didn't want to sell, what we could or couldn't support. And then from getting that, we actually realized that a lot of that was still very manual. So while we managed to get, you know, sales and finance to be friends again, the challenges around the amount of time it was taking to order a deal, the amount of time it was then taking for our customers to have access to the product that they had just purchased, it was just slow, and we knew that we could do better than that. So that's where we started looking at solutions like Salesforce Cpq. We had leaders in our business who had worked with Cpq before, and that kind of pointed us in that direction, and then went down that path.
So the first step was really business process.
Completely.
Get the sales team together, get the finance team together, make the rules, or the 80% rules, and a little bit of flexibility before looking at a technology solution. But the business process and making the rules only got you so far, you're saying?
Totally.
You still needed a technology solution to automate some of that pain away.
Yeah.
And put those rules into place.
Automate that pain away, that sounds
like
that pain away. So I mean, we knew that, like, we could go out there tomorrow and buy a tool. And you could buy a tool tomorrow and like feel really good about it. But if you don't know what you want the tool to do, then it sits on a shelf and it probably actually creates more pain and more complexity and more kind of workarounds if it's not built to what you actually want it to do.
Yep.
So there was that upfront work that we needed to do, also internally from like a change management perspective as well, right? You've gone from one way of working to something that feels very big brothery and rules and all the rest of it. And so we needed to bring people on that journey as to the why and get them on that page.
Yep.
So when we did start to look at a tool, we then A, knew what we wanted it to do, but B, we also kind of already had people supporting this whole thing, and it was then about making them more efficient in their jobs.
So rather than being a handcuff or a handbrake for the sales team, you're an enabler. You're giving them something that will enable them to sell more quickly, more accurately, and the finance team giving them a solution that they can actually fulfill.
Totally.
Yeah. And so that disconnect between sales, finance is getting solved.
Yep.
And this is a good segue. So you've got business process getting solved.
Yep.
You're looking at a technology, but you needed some help to put it in.
Yes.
Or to work with the business to configure the thing. How did you choose a partner?
So I think it was actually through some existing relationships that our business had with Cloudwerx, and then recommendations through from Salesforce as well. So we went through a little bit of a, I guess, discovery phase with you guys and got to know you. And I think the biggest thing for us was
before marriage,
something like that. I think the biggest thing for us was making sure that we had a partner that was going to work with us to a solution. So we actually didn't have a Salesforce admin at the time, which looking back seems like total madness to take on something like that without a Salesforce admin in-house, but that is it. So it was myself and our finance operations manager, Kyle, kind of leaning into this project with no real technical experience ourselves. So we bought the business knowledge, but we knew that we needed someone that could help us understand what good looked like, help us kind of almost mold some of our business knowledge as well to what other similar businesses to ours had done in this space before. So we, you know, because we don't know what we don't know at that point, and then actually work with us to implement the solution in a time frame that wasn't going to be 12 months, right? We moved quickly. We wanted it done quickly.
Yep. And I remember we had lots of time on site. COVID happened at the start at some point, so it was a bit virtual, but I think understanding your business was a big goal of ours, because you know, knowing where you'd come from and where you were heading. So global approvals process is a good example. Making sure that we configured an approvals process that allowed multiple steps to happen in parallel, because you had people approving in the US or in Europe for a salesperson in Australia, and they didn't want to wait 24 hours or 48 hours or 3 weeks to get an order approved, right?
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things for us with Cpq. I think like the ultimate reason why we chose that solution was kind of threefold. The three main things it solved for us were, you know, really around that standardization of our product catalog. And as we bring on new products, you know, we've acquired a couple of businesses in the last few years, and integrating that in and actually helping the sales team understand what they have to sell, that, you know, a standardized product catalog that could then connect through to other systems was really powerful for us. But definitely on the approval side, I think, so it was actually other way around. We had sales teams in the US and the UK, but we had our finance and legal team all based here in Australia, Australian headquartered companies. So particularly end of quarter, if you're wanting to get a deal out and get that across the line and you've got to wait 24 hours overnight at a minimum to get a, you know, extension on your payment terms approved or something for a large deal, that just became a real nightmare. So being able to run these things in parallel, know where our blockers were, know what was kind of where things were at, helped us big time.
So we've put the rulebook in.
We've put the rulebook in.
We've got Cpq configured, and how do you manage the system today? You mentioned an admin. A lot of people are thinking this is a huge expense and you need to have a huge tech team. Can you dispel that myth for us?
I can dispel the myth. So we have one Salesforce admin who joined us just on, it was 2 years ago yesterday actually, and he has been picking up the vast majority. I would say Michael's got more than enough skill set to take on, you know, the vast majority of what we want to do in CPQ. It has been a learning curve for him because he was not previously a CPQ admin, but he's been able to pick that up over time well and truly. So what it now looks like today is Michael covers probably 90% of the improvement work that we're wanting to be doing, as well as sort of that ongoing tweaks, because our business will always evolve. And then we look to re-engage Cloudwerx when we have some of these like more one-off discrete projects that we want to get turned around really quickly, and it becomes a speed kind of piece. That's where we look to re-engage you guys to just help speed some things up for us.
And I think that's it's hard to quantify the cost savings of having an in-house person make those changes, because this is a type of solution that isn't static. You mentioned you have to make changes and tweaks, and to not need a heavy development background to be able to configure these kind of solutions. That must be really helpful for the business, that you can wake up one morning, Sally, and have an idea and potentially a few days later it's in the system.
Yeah, and that's a big thing for us, and I think that's also one of the things that we learnt through the implementation as well. Was I think we to begin with almost wanted to go too far with this thing. We wanted to really overcomplicate it to fit our business that wasn't necessarily best practice. So we did go down a bit of a path of sort of building some Apex that it goes completely over my head as to what it does, but to make these things fit our business. And I think one of the things we've learnt is that that's not necessarily required, and that ability to be able to have your admin, you know, kind of plug and play and adapt things as we need to has become really important for us as we evolve.
So today, where is SafetyCulture at? How big are you? How many customers have you got? What's the size of the sales team? Can you give me a few numbers?
I can give you some numbers. So we've got about 750 staff globally. Of those, just shy of 200 are in our sales and success team. So I don't know what that multiple is, almost 10 times the sales team in the years that I've been there. Sales and success, sorry, I should say. In terms of customers, we have about 25,000 paid customers globally, and a whole free base that I should know the number of. But yeah, we support quite a number of customers these days across about 80 countries globally.
And if you had to put, a list together of benefits that you have now with the new business processes and Salesforce Cpq in your Salesforce, what are some of the things that you can do now that you couldn't before?
Yeah, so I think, God, it's endless, right? I mean, first and foremost, it was just helping the team, be more efficient in how they got these things out the door. It gave us greater visibility as to what we were selling, so that we were actually able to bill that quickly, get cash in the door quicker, reduce your debtor days, reduce your payment cycles. That is helpful. Cash is king. So we had things like that, but then quite interestingly, some of the things that we've been looking at recently is even by tracking certain approval rules, we're then from an ops perspective and an enablement perspective, able to look at performance around, who's leveraging discounting to close deals versus who isn't, and how can we maybe take the approach that someone that isn't using discounting as a best practice to then train the rest of the team on how not to rely on that as much, or how to leverage certain structures to a deal in a way that really resonates with our customers that we've seen success on and can play that through. So it's not just about that sort of efficiency and governance thing. That's been great and really helpful for us, but it's also about how we improve the way we do our day-to-day with some of the data that we're now able to capture.
Amazing. And you mentioned earlier, you're an accountant by trade, and I did notice earlier you were checking some stats and some graphs on your phone, which I'm sure is something the boss of RevOps does regularly.
I'm a numbers gal.
Yep. So you have this data at your fingertips now. You've gone through the journey. Obviously, it's not over. You're continuing to improve. But what lessons would you give to other RevOps leaders, or even if they don't call themselves that, people in your shoes who are trying to improve this process? What are the lessons you learnt over the last kind of few years?
Sure. Well, I think kind of what I touched on earlier, we run the risk of overcomplicating all of this, trying to solve every single one of the problems. And I think getting clearer on just exactly where the pain points are and what that impact of that pain point is. So, time lost or things like your debtor days reducing, I think it was 40% or something in our first year. We saw a reduction in that.
Wow.
So like that's stuff that's really tangible to a business. So we could have solved for, and we tried to solve for 47 other things over here that were somewhat periphery. Yes, were pain points, but were maybe not the biggest pain points if you actually quantified impact. It's kind of getting to that view of it that I think's really helped us then prioritize what we do next.
And we've learned a lot as well as through the project. So it was about 2 years ago, and obviously we've done a lot of CPQ projects since then, a lot of projects since then. So Cloudwerx, we weren't that old either when we started working together. We're now 200 odd staff and across APAC. One of the things that we try to pride ourselves on is making sure we do that initial upfront analysis of what are we going to measure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned there's 47 things you could probably look at, but what are the biggest ticket items? What are we trying to solve, and how do we measure those at the start, and how do we measure those at the end? And I think SafetyCulture has done a great job through that process of learning what are we tracking. And yes, there's enhancements to tweak the small pain points, but focusing on the big things first. What is next, I guess, for SafetyCulture? You've got a great platform. There's all sorts of exciting things. You've made some acquisitions, obviously recently. As a RevOps leader, where do you see things going? Not just in your business, but I guess in the marketplace for RevOps. This is your chance to kind of teach us.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
On the spot.
On the spot. That's a real on the spotter. Look, I think the environment that we're in right now in particular means we've got to get smarter about how we do things, right? I think there was probably the last couple of years there's been almost somewhat of a tendency to throw people at problems, and that's not necessarily what the market's conducive to at the moment. We're a little bit more conscious on some of those decisions than what we have been. So it's about how we get smarter with what we have. So much of that comes down to automation, so much of that comes down to efficiencies and trying to address some of these potential blockers, or just looking at where things aren't working as well as they could be and what they could be evolving into. So I think from a SafetyCulture perspective, you know, we've got this product suite now. We've got these 2 businesses that have been acquired, but it's now figuring out how we bring them into the one solution, whether that be from a product perspective, whether it be from a go-to-market perspective, combination of all the above. Like, just how do we make the most of those opportunities and make the most of the opportunity ahead of us?
Well, I could listen to you talk about this all day, but I think we're going to wrap up.
Cool.
I want to thank you for your partnership at SafetyCulture. You're such a great customer, and we love your story. Thank you for kind of spending time with us today.
Pleasure.
And best of luck as you continue to evolve as a RevOps leader in Australia, and obviously SafetyCulture globally. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.